I'd like to welcome Dr. Desi Reddy and Mike Parrish. They're going to do an update on the residency program in a combined rounds. Just for anyone that hasn't noticed, we picked it up a notch with our food. We now have hot food. I did that to try and improve attendance at rounds. So after you enjoy your breakfast and you go to the Aurora site, please spread the word that the food is much better at rounds, and so we get continued better attendance. The other thing that's new, for faculty that have the link for the ETA, we're now webcasting the rounds. And if you click on it anywhere in the world, you can actually watch the rounds live. And in addition to that, afterwards, they're archived on our website. You can watch them afterwards. So I'm just trying to improve attendance and people seeing the rounds. Okay, welcome.
Perfect. Where's the camera, James?
Where's the camera?
Oh, there.
Right there.
Oh, hi, Mom. No, anyway, this is crazy. Anyway, welcome all, and thanks for coming. Obviously, it's the usual familiar faces that come to these rounds, but that's great. So it's been a full year since Mike and I have taken over, September to, well, we're just in October now, but one complete year. And I think a lot has happened in the course of the year. So just this brief strokes, broad overview of where we are at and where we hope to go. So nothing's changed. That gives you, I mean, for people that are new to the department, Mike and I have taken over. It's been a year. I have to tell you, it was daunting initially, but it's a lot more fun than I thought it would be. It does come with a lot of stress, and I think I've grown exponentially in this year than I've ever grown in the 56 years now prior. I've started doing yoga as a side something just to de-stress. That's not me. But my LCBO bill has gone through the roof, but that's okay. But all in all, it's been a real growth experience, and I'm really grateful for that. Mike, as you know, has gone into dahlias in a much bigger way now. He's winning international competitions. He's won the North American, I don't know what the actual award is, but it's something, it sounds sounds grand anyway. So we're still there and hope to be around for the next few years. Just to give you I mean, you know, I think this is the most understated group in our program, Candace and Tammy. I mean, they really are the backbone, and, you know, for certainly myself, I tend to forget the input and the contributions they make on a daily basis to the department, but they seriously are the backbone of the department. Just to recap, I know somebody asked me the other day, who was the CTU director at the Residency, and I thought, man, that's a bit crazy, but what was difficult about this whole thing was trying to get pics of these people. And I ended up going to, I think, Canada's Most Wanted, and ended up with a picture of, well, John is in charge of the Residency, and if anybody thinks white men cannot jump, they're wrong. He was a basketball player of note, I think, at Western. Jeff sitting in the front, he's in charge of the St. Joe's, sorry. Ooh, that's awful. Maddie, as you can see, this is surely Canada's Most Wanted. So difficult to get pics of all these guys. But anyway, Maddie's in charge of the general, and Amanda Whippy, who's totally off any form of social media, is at Mumsy, and she's just taken over from Mike. So she's been a CTU director for the past 8 or 9 months now, I guess. Then there's other members in the RTC, and when you see memos coming from the RTC, you're probably wondering who are these people that are sitting in this room deciding the future of the department, essentially. But there are members at large, and Alana represents HHS, Greg Costanza represents St. Joe's, then there's the curriculum chair, Anne-Marie Dettina, and then there's resident reps. Jeff at present is the chief resident, and there's Dave Parsons, Mark Cheusman, hope you said that right, and Janice Yu. Next month will be elections for the next round of reps, and hopefully we will get a PGY1 rep in that group. Then there's other people that are still prominent in the department, and they also work in the background a bit, and you see them around. So obviously Linda is still involved with simulation in a big way, getting more and more passionate about it, it seems. Anne-Marie is in charge of the curriculum still, and Alana does everything that everybody else is unable to do. So she's our in-house techie in chief, does an amazing job putting all the gaps together. There's two new positions we created. Well, not totally new. The first one is definitely new. Wellness Director and Russ Brown, I think he did a round a few months ago around what his job description was about. But he's up and going. And then the ombudsperson presently is Peter Moisiak, who's replaced Steve Puchalski. So just to be aware that there are these individuals around and utilize their skill set or whatever they can contribute to your well-being down the road. So what has happened in the last year? So I think the biggest change has been, we started in September, in November October we started with CALMS, and we decided to make some changes. And I think the biggest change we've made is introduce this MMI. And for people that are not familiar with it, it's multiple mini interviews. Essentially, it's something that was grown out of McMaster with Kelly Dorr. So we were in a fortunate position to be able to leverage her skill set, and she helped us tremendously in putting this together. So essentially, it's 8 little stations. One station is where they meet, Mike and I, and that's an informal station. And the other 8 stations are very structured interviews looking at certain specific domains. And there's certainly robust sort of scenarios that Kelly's come up with. The beauty of this is that each station has 2 raters, staff and a resident. And so as a result of that, you end up with 16 data points, much more than we've done in the past. And it's the amazing part of this is that it really, in sort of debriefing the whole thing, it really doesn't target excellence, but it certainly targets red flags. So you'll see a pattern of red flags emerging just by, the individual going through 8 independent stations, but the same issues will be flagged consecutively, which is it's a pretty amazing way of actually picking up people you really don't want in your department. So just to acknowledge Kelly Dorr, who helped us tremendously with putting this whole thing together. And generally the feedback, both for the social component and the MMI, was really positive from both staff and certainly the candidates. Just to say the only thing that we did differently was have it the night before. And I think it was successful purely because of the resident turnout. I think every resident in our department turned up, and the candidates were very, very grateful for that interaction. So Mike and I just went to the ICRE this weekend, and it seemed like a lot of people are starting to get rid of the social. They didn't think there was any value in it. There was cost implications, obviously, but I think that's I found one of the most valuable parts of that whole CALMS interview process. Not so much for us to actually determine candidate suitability or anything, but mainly for candidates to get a good idea of what this program's all about. And the residents did an amazing job in selling the program. So we'll stick with that format, I think, in the short term anyway. The end result of all of that, we had 48 interviews. We have 7 PGY1s, and you probably have met them or seen them around. I'm going to mess up the names. Anyway, Ryan, Sean, always forget her name. Rui, thanks. Christina, David, Gabby, Jordan, and Nick. Nick was a transfer from internal medicine. Just to give you an idea of the awards that have been presented over the course of the year. So in terms of the reach for the top, just to give you an idea, so the present awards that we have is the Larry Chu Award, and it's meant for staff, and it's around professionalism and collegiality. And those were the sort of traits that Larry Chu embodied in vast amounts. Then the Vince Politi Award, and that's for the best clinical teacher. And we have another resident award, which is the Hisham Zakari Award. It's meant for senior residents, and it also embodies professionalism and collegiality. So what did we do new was the Bridge Aria Award, and this was basically on the impetus of Maddie Ali, and grateful and thankful for Maddie for actually putting this idea forward, because we did want to acknowledge Bridge in some way, because he did embody generosity, respect, wellness, and lifestyle balance in an amazing amount, and he's definitely missed by the faculty. So in order to acknowledge him and have something that has some longevity attached to it, we've created the Bridge Aria Award, and it's meant for junior residents, and it's essentially nominated by the resident body. Dylan Hort was the first recipient at Reach for the Top. So another change that came around is the undergrad sessions. As you probably know, these are borderline painful, I guess, to some degree, but it's a commitment that we do have to the faculty to actually teach medical students. Essentially, Daniel has done an amazing job in actually putting that whole curriculum together and revamping it to a large degree. But essentially, our resident body is responsible for providing 35 sessions of teaching to the medical students. This mainly fell on the PGY 4s and 5s, and there was a bit of apprehension, consternation on the part of the residents because it was the final year of exam prep, and this sort of used to get in the way to some degree. So we switched it around, and now the bulk of the resident teaching will fall on the PGY 2 group for two reasons. Partly because they do think they have the clinical knowledge and certainly the book knowledge to teach undergrads, but also they sort of just past the medical school phase, so they'll be more in tune with what's happening on the floor with medical students. And anyway, they seem to have embraced it fairly easily and nicely. The second cohort that will be responsible for teaching will be the PGY 3 residents, doing their research block. And then the unfilled blocks will be filled by the PGY 4s, and then PGY 5s will be our last resort. We introduced a newsletter, and the idea was just for communication purposes, because we found that there was a lot of stuff that we were unable to, it's so difficult to meet the whole resident body at any one time. You can meet specific cohorts, PGYs 3s or 5s or whatever, but not the whole, target the whole body was difficult. So the newsletter was meant to address that, and it's essentially a bi-weekly thing. We're on edition 16. And I have a lot of fun putting this together, but it gives me an idea of what the week entails in terms of the academic program, but also added a social component, and it's just such insight into individuals that we probably pass when they go through 5 years of residency if you don't get into the background behind why they're here and how they ended up here. So that's been, I think, a relatively successful, not innovation, but introduction to communication within the resident body. So the big thing coming up is accreditation. Now this is, as you probably know, one of the most anxiety-provoking components of any residency program. So the Royal College does the big one, but there is an internal review first. So the postgrad office will come in and just get 2 faculty members and a resident to come in and review the program. And the idea of this review is to pick up all the little gaps and issues that need improvement prior to the big Royal College external review. So ours is scheduled for March 4th and 5th. Now that will entail, so it takes a bit of organization because the committee is expected to meet all faculty members, all committee members, and all residents. So over those 2 days, we're just going to have to figure out how we're going to make that happen. It's obviously been done in the past, and Candice has got a template as usual, so she will make it happen, so that will be great. There are important aspects of the accreditation because there are new standards, and we will address that in the form of either bulletins, newsletters, or online workshops. But there are a lot of things that faculty and residents need to be aware of prior to this happening. So just stay tuned for all the bulletins that are going to come through. This is the big one, and it's in November 2022. James just wanted clarification. So we still have a few years, James, to get our house in order. It will be a completely different kettle of fish. The problem is that there's so many new standards. The Royal College has come up with a new platform for placing information. And there's a lot of teething issues with anything that comes from the Royal College, obviously. But anyway, it seems to be a work in progress, and hopefully by 2022 it gets sorted out. Just to reiterate, these things still crop up. So as I said, we went to the ICRE this weekend, and this was one of the things that Dell, I think it was Dell, somebody was asked also, one of the faculty members, so how do you find CBD? What's the issues with CBD in your faculty? And the guy asked, so what is CBD? Those sort of things really can just nail a program for no good reason. The intrinsic roles are still being asked by and addressed in a large way by these accreditation committees. And just to be aware, the major change has been, manager has become leader. And get onto the Royal College website whenever you have any downtime in the OR or anywhere else, because there's a whole host of very valuable information that does impact the way residency education is done. They've really worked hard to revamp it, and the resources on the website at the moment is pretty amazing. There's a lot of good stuff there. The 2 policies that at some point people have to read would be related to our postgrad office's policy document on harassment and intimidation and safety. safety within our department and the postgrad office, very generic safety policy. So we will pass that on. They're pretty hefty reads, but, well, for accreditation purposes, everybody has to be familiar with it because this is key to passing one of the main indicators for accreditation. I just want to address resident wellness again because this is one of the other major accreditation issues that the other, like Dell, McGill, and Queens did face. People came in and the first thing they asked, so how do you address resident wellness? So I just want to reiterate this, and we will go through each one at some point. But just to know, within our program, we have a very robust system in place for residents to activate in the need of wellness issues. So there's the CTU director would be the first port of call, myself or Mike. Then we have Russ Brown as a wellness director. If it's something that you want to keep separate from the program, but you need to address with faculty, Peter Moisiak is the person to address it with. Then everybody's attached to a faculty mentor. In addition, you have a resident buddy, and there's the chief resident. So that's within the program. That's what Anesthesia and McMaster has done. But there's also faculty offices that you can leverage. The main one would be the Residence Affairs Office. And that's been it's worked out really well when you did have to utilize their, whatever they need to offer. They've gone overboard to accommodate all our requirements and needs. There's offices based in Hamilton, Waterloo, and Niagara. Then there's mental health and wellness, and this involves a psychotherapist, a psychologist, and the Mohawk EAP, and all of this is free for any resident within the faculty. And then there's professionalism and equity supports, and everybody, must have heard of Robert Edwards, and she's a lawyer within the faculty, and she usually deals with professionalism issues. And then there's Megan Ross, anything related with sexual violence or allied issues. So the faculty has also has a whole host of things. And then there's the professional organizations as well. PERO being your, up there as well. The OMA Physician Health Program, CMPA has resources, and this I learned from ICRE is the Resident Doctors of Canada. Resident Doctors of Canada. Not sure how many people are familiar with them, but they seem to be quite an ongoing enterprise, very active, and I'm sure PERO reps might introduce us to give us more information on what they actually do. Just want to tackle something around feedback because so Mike's going to deal with CBD, but CBD is based essentially on feedback. The model has changed. It requires a bit of a change in mindset and the way we have done business in the past. Fortunately, in anesthesia, we've always done feedback in real time. So the shift from traditional teaching or classical teaching to CBD model hasn't been vast because we have used that concept in the model for time immemorial. But we depend a lot on this feedback when we are evaluating residents as part of the competency committee. And just want to dedicate a few slides just to improve the robustness and the value of feedback. So this is just a simple definition of what feedback's all about. It needs to be specific. So just saying, carry on reading well, or Miller's a good resource or something is not specific. It doesn't really help anybody. We still get a fair bit of that happening. So it needs to be specific. It needs to be observed. Just for want of a better example, somebody remotely, sitting in the lounge while a code is happening and then evaluating the code subsequently really doesn't gel. So you have to be there in real time. And the main premise behind feedback, it has to be meant to improve. So it's not an assessment point as such. True feedback is meant to improve the competence and the performance of the trainee. So there's three important components to it. And I just put this up here. There's so many models for feedback, and I know Anne has done a few workshops related to feedback, which was a really valuable one when I did it, and I think it's something that we'd have to put in place again. But this was something that I learned from ICRE this past weekend, and it's a model that Calgary used in their ICU, and they found it so useful that it's rolled out faculty-wide, particularly in the context of CBD. So everybody that's starting CBD, all the residents and all the faculty have to go through this Be Smart workshop, they call it. And it's been published in Clinical Teacher, so it's public domain at the moment, and they're quite happy to share the model. But it seems to work well, and after I went through it, I thought this is because I'm a really awful feedback giver, it just seemed to be rushed with this whole thing. But this sort of gave me a framework to work with that I hope to inculcate into my own practice, just to make it a bit more meaningful. And I'll just go through it in a brief, so it does impact both the coach, the teacher, and the learner. And the way they broke it down is B SMART. So B was build rapport, and this is important. Obviously, most of us work with each other a lot of the time. Over 5 years, you get to know the ins and outs of almost everybody. So anesthesia is great that way, but when there are learners from PICU or RT guys coming through, it's difficult because you're only interacting with them for brief periods of time. But fortunately, we sort of have we're better situated to make rapport happen. And the other thing they said about this was find a space that's appropriate. Doing it in a public domain doesn't really work. They encourage people to actually find quiet spaces in the OR, in PACU, in a nice room somewhere where you can make this a one-on-one conversation. But for the coach, it's the coaching mindset. It's not evaluating, not denigrating, and not being critical. It's more about how can I make you better type of mindset that they're trying to encourage. And for the learner, it's being receptive to feedback. And that's key to the whole model. Then the expectations have to be shared, and that has to be determined a priori. And the beauty of CBD is that it allows us to do that because you have EPAs. You can say up front, I'd like to be, like you to watch my sterile technique for central line insertion today. That sort of thing. Decide that beforehand. So both you and the learner have an idea of what you're actually going to be evaluating for that day. Then they said the self-assessment piece was really important because it just basically opens up the conversation on a number of fronts, but gives people insight into how much they actually, how they objectify their performance. And 9 times out of 10, they found that the coach and the learner were on the same page. Often, if somebody messed up, both parties knew they messed up. If they did really well, both parties knew they did really well. Very rarely there was discordance between the two, the way the action was perceived. Then back to the meaningful feedback. It has to be relevant, it has to be specific, and it has to be balanced. Not the sandwich technique. I think it's a technique we all use, but I don't think that's the most appropriate technique of giving feedback. And they say, as I said, the learner has to be receptive and has to clarify. So ask questions about the feedback you're receiving, like like sterile technique. So why do you use chlorhexidine over iodine or whatever, stuff like that. Just make it a conversation as opposed to just being receiving all these negative criticisms. Just to carry on with the B SMART acronym, actionable. So when you diagnose the issue, then how do you remedy it? And the actionable items have to be realistic. So, just to say, oh, well, I don't know, Reed Miller, I guess, would be a reasonable example. Alternatively, say, why don't we get the infectious disease person in the OR to give us a little talk on, or, you can engage with them on how you should actually prepare a sterile field or something like that. But something that is doable and something that is in small bites as opposed to some massive thing that is unaccomplishable. On the learner side, just confirm the plan. Oh, so you want me to go and meet up with Liz in the OR to talk about sterile technique? That's doable. And then the reaction, so confirm mutual understanding, and then so you just have the conversation where both parties are on the same page in terms of the expectations. The learner is supposed to summarize the feedback. And the last part was transcribe. Now this was a bit difficult for me because in Calgary they actually have a score attached to this feedback component. And that, I felt, personally changed it from a coaching feedback component to an assessment component. Because nobody wants to see a score of 2 or 3 when they expect a 4 and 5. So we just have to figure out how we're going to operationalize the score component of this thing. But anyway, it's a discussion for a future time. And then on the learner side is to translate that feedback into some form of action. And it's supposed to be followed up by faculty down the road. So just leaving it hanging really doesn't help. But it's a neat little acronym that you can incorporate into your daily practice in terms of feedback. Just to go through some of the awards that were presented over the last year. So the Fred Baxter appropriately named award for nephrology was Justine got it last year. Then the MSA Outstanding Resident Award, Caitlin received that. And Resident Exchange Day, we did amazingly well. First and third place, Dylan and Will in first and Justine in third. So we did really well with the Resident Exchange. And I have to say, I mean, I feel the program's going in the right direction, is going well. And I think a huge component of this is the quality of the residents we have in this program. Anyway, but I was going to say a politically incorrect thing, but anyway, this is good. But the residents have been amazingly cooperative, open to change, and really put their back to the wall to moving the program forward. And goes without saying, the faculty have been a huge part. I mean, they've always been. I mean, we're going through some trials and tribulations at the moment, but all of these are little setbacks that we hope to overcome shortly. But the bottom line is the faculty have always been the backbone of this program in terms of enthusiasm, commitment to teaching, and resident education and well-being. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mike. Yeah. What do we do here, Mike? You have a cord.
Perfect. Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out to our rounds this morning and learning more about what we've done in the program so far and where we're going. My major role in the residency program is all COMC by design. I'm the chair of the COMC committee, and so what I'm going to do over the next 15-20 minutes is give you an overview of where we are now with CPD. And I must say, having been to the ICRE this past few days, it gives you a good general appreciation for the fact that we're now third year into CPD, and I think we're on the right track. Other programs are lagging behind us because they haven't been into CPD as much as we have so far. So what I'd like to talk about is basically to expand upon this coaching model that CPD has introduced, and then talk about how the COMC by Design programs are broken down in terms of milestones, EPAs, and then the function of the COMC committee in terms of determining resident progression. And you have the code already on the blackboard for anyone who needs it. So as I mentioned earlier, the anesthesia across the country has been into CPD as one of the first specialties, along with ENT. And so now we're into our third year of COMC by Design. And so the traditional programs are starting to, the resident cohorts in the traditional programs are starting to dwindle. The whole mindset of COMC by Design is this competency continuum that the Royal College has introduced. So as a newly graduated medical student into residency, you start out in transition to discipline, and you build upon that with the foundations phase, core, and then transition to practice. How this plays out for us in our program it's interesting that it hasn't really changed too much the different organization of the rotations per year that we have always had in the traditional stream. So when we introduced CPD, it was more of how we assessed and kind of dealt with the assessment phase of resident performance, and our rotations hasn't really changed all that much, which I think is good, in the fact that we always have had a robust system. So as I mentioned, the first three blocks when a resident comes into our program is transition to discipline, and they have 3 EPAs to achieve. Then they go off onto their off-service rotations for the next few months and come back into anesthesia in May and June, which is the last 2 blocks of first year. Foundations phase has 16 EPAs. The second year, as you know, is completely anesthesia related. And then once they finish their second year, they go back into their off-service critical care year for year 3, which is the beginning of their core. And basically, they're building upon the competencies that they've already established. I think the biggest change as well that's coming for the CPD cohorts is the change in the Royal College examinations. So currently, it's a comprehensive exam of written and oral exam together, and the individuals have to go through both components to find out whether they've successfully achieved the Royal College exams or not. What's really changing for CPD, which I think is great, is the fact that it's going to be a 2-step process where the written exam is in the fall of the 5th year, and so you pass the written exam, you've got that behind you in the fall of your 5th year, and then you just have clinical work to concentrate on, and then you do the oral exam in the spring. And so the transition to practice phase, I think, is one of the benefits of CPD. We're finally going back to when I was a resident, when you had a 2-step process. You did a written exam first, you got that out of the way, and then you did an oral exam. So how do these EPAs and milestones come together for assessment? So the milestones, as Desi had mentioned, are based on the CAN-MEDS roles. There are multiple milestones within each EPA, and for those that might be junior within the audience and not sure what an EPA stands for, it's an entrustable professional activity. So each specialty across the country has basically broken down what is required within their specialty to be a physician to practice in that specialty, and they've come up with entrustable professional activities that are built upon within each phase of training. So each EPA has many different milestones which have to be observed and assessed to become successful in an EPA. For all of us faculty and residents in CPD, you're all familiar with what an EPA looks like. I just want to go through one quickly. So I've randomly chosen the Foundations EPA number 1. So it's to use the anesthetic assessment to generate the anesthetic considerations and management plan, basically, including post-op disposition and informed consent in basically a non-complex patient, non-complex surgery. Within that, there are multiple milestones that have to be achieved, which are linked to the CAN-MEDS roles. I'm not going to go through all of these milestones, but I'm just going to show you on the next few slides all the different milestones that are put into that one EPA. So there's actually 20 different milestones that have been incorporated into the one EPA. What faculty may or may not know is that the bolded ones are the ones that the specialty committee has deemed important to achieve that EPA, and those are the ones that are ending up in the final EPA assessment form that the faculty complete when you do an EPA. So the bottom line of an EPA is whether the resident required direction, guidance, prompting, or independence. And there is tons of discussion around these anchors. Our anchors are going to change again next year, which we'll talk about that in the spring. But I think for now, we have a really good, robust system where we're one-on-one with the resident every single day, and we can truly provide feedback to how they're performing in terms of their EPAs. I should say as well that every EPA has a required number that are required to be achieved prior to moving on to the next step. Sorry. If you look at the guidance anchor, the resident requires some guidance or coaching. And I think that's an important point, because my next few slides is about the coaching model that CPD is trying to incorporate into our way of teaching medicine. So these are some slides from the Royal College. Basically, it talks about coaching in the moment and coaching over time, which we all, when we're working with residents one-on-one every day, we have coaching in the moment, which we're the coaches for progression of allowing that resident to understand where they are now and where they should be over time. The workplace-based assessments is a huge buzzword in CPD from the Royal College. So we have numerous assessments that we have to perform. Workplace-based assessments are basically referring to whenever we assess an EPA and also when we do a global daily evaluation. So the whole thought behind CPD is that we have multiple assessments over time, and it's allowing the residents to observe where they are now and where they should be over time. And we as staff should realize that our priority is to be their clinical coach, and we will make sure that they progress and improve over time. So it's the whole shift in paradigm of thinking. Traditional stream residents go for a lengthy period of time without truly being assessed and having the ability to say that they're being coached and moved in the right direction in terms of their competency and progression. So the traditional stream is used to having high stakes exams at the end of a period of time. So what we're really doing is taking the high stakes exam at the end and moving it to low stakes evaluations, assessments every single day, where there's potential for coaching and improvement on a daily basis, and that will hopefully embed a culture where resident can come in and perform EPAs, and the goal is to achieve the coaching every single day and not necessarily coming in to actually achieve the EPA. So it's really assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of the learning that's already taken place. Some of the things that we've learned over the last couple of years is the fact that EPAs traditionally are in the moment observation in the operating room with the resident. We've learned that there are a lot of opportunities for indirect assessments of EPAs, whether it's situation where you can't readily identify the fact that what's going to happen over the next 20 minutes is going to be an EPA, so therefore it needs to be assessed. Residents can actually do clinical duties, kind of write a report or write a clinical note in the chart and have that discussed with the staff, and that can actually be an EPA. So there's a lot of opportunities for indirect assessments. So what we're really trying to promote is the engagement of the coaching conversation. Coming to work every day, you establish rapport with the resident or the learner, and you talk about what the resident wants to work on and achieve that day. So it's the improvements over time that is the different mindset for competency by design. So how does this multiple assessments, low stakes evaluations every single day, how does that fit into the progression model? So we have a competency by design competence committee, and we also have academic advisors. So every resident who is in a CPD residency has an academic advisor attached to them, which they are their person who provides coaching over time, and the academic advisor is with the individual over their 5 years of training. it's their duty to have periodic meetings to discuss the resident progression, and the academic advisor is that individual who brings that information about what the resident has done to the competency committee level for the competency meetings. I just want to acknowledge the current academic advisors, and we currently have 13 academic advisors. So we have individuals who, and we kind of cap the quota to 2 residents per academic advisor, just so it doesn't burden the faculty. So over the next couple of years, most of these people have 2 residents already. So most, over the next couple of years, we're going to be recruiting more academic advisors for anyone who's interested. The sources of feedback that are used at the competency committee level primarily are EPAs and the global daily evaluations that are for the most junior residents. Once the resident is in PGY2 and they start doing the oral exams, the in-house exams, and simulation, then the points of data that the competency committee uses becomes a little bit more robust after that. The individuals that sit on the competence committee are the following, and I'd just like to acknowledge them as well, that they do an amazing amount of work behind the scenes, because CPD really does promote a different level of assessment, which requires a different committee. So the competence committee is a subcommittee of the residency training committee. I chair the committee, so my duties are to call the meetings. We meet on a quarterly basis. My next slide will show that a little bit more in-depth of what the meetings look like, but I just wanted to also recognize Sandra Montero, who is from Merit, who is the medical education research individual. She is connected with our department, so she sits on the committee. It's also recommended by the Royal College that we have a bit of an external individual who is, we've elected to have Femi Ajani, who is the program director for neurosurgery, join our group as well. So as I mentioned, the competence committee meets quarterly. It's a Royal College mandate that each resident's progression has to be discussed twice a year. So within those quarterly meetings, we discuss each cohort. The information brought to the committee is by the academic advisor, who is, we call them as the primary reviewer of the portfolio of that individual's work. And then I assign a member of the competence committee to review the same portfolio or the same information that the academic advisor is bringing to the group, just to have checks and balances to make sure that nothing is overlooked. So we review all the data that's collected from EPA's global daily evaluations and all the other information brought forward. The competence committee then makes recommendations that go to the program director and the residency training committee with respect to the resident progression. So over time, you can see that the question of competence becomes a little bit more clear with taking various data points every day, every year, and forming those into assessments that the individual receives. So the things that we've learned so far, I think at the beginning of CPD there was a bit of, we're all high achievers, we all want to perform well, and we all want to have good evaluations. I think the thing that CPD is trying to teach us is that when a resident does an EPA, you don't have to wait until you know that you can achieve it to do it. Like, we're missing out on these opportunities for learning and coaching that can take place over time, as opposed to just going in and not having those opportunities of coaching and not doing an EPA until you can actually fully achieve it. So, we're all in the mindset that we want to achieve everything that we start out doing, but obviously training takes 5 years and it takes a long time to gain that competency. So I would just like to encourage everyone, faculty and residents, that we should be doing one EPA per day. And I think that's the major thing that we've tried to encourage the last year. remember that these are low stakes, frequent assessments that the individuals are receiving, and it is an opportunity for coaching. We've learned as well, as I mentioned earlier, coming into CPD, we felt that we were told by the Royal College that every EPA had to be confirmed upfront prospectively before the resident actually performs the EPA. We're learning now that there's a lot of times where the EPA can be discussed and acknowledged after the fact. So if a resident goes to recovery room and deals with an issue there, they help with stabilization of a patient, and they come back and they discuss that with the faculty. That is actually one of the EPAs and foundations, and that can be done retrospectively. There's lots of opportunities to do EPAs after the fact. There's a lot of EPAs that can be done by indirect assessment as well. So this is actually, the one thing with CPD, it has completely increased the amount of assessment that the faculty members are doing. Other than one EPA per day, we're actually stressing as well that there should be a global daily evaluation completed on each resident every day, whether you're in the traditional stream or the competency by design stream. That gives the competence committee more information about the progression of the residents. So, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. EPAs that can be done retrospectively, are they marked or highlighted in some way?
No.
Because, for example, like you're putting the central line, you don't want to do that retrospectively because the whole point is to do it in advance to coach it versus dealing with something in PAC, for example. Would that be something that would be useful, or do you suggest our common sense in terms of looking at the...
I would just use your common sense. I think this is something the Royal College is recognizing now. So every specialty is learning from their previous experiences. The whole retrospective EPA didn't really come to my mind until last year, when I was actually in the OR with individuals and thinking, well, you know what, talking about something that the resident just did, and they say, well, can it be an EPA? And I thought, well, why can't it be an EPA, right? For those EPAs that are achieved and those EPAs that are not achieved, it's a good teaching moment and coaching moment, and I think we need to take opportunity to do that. The Royal College doesn't come out and say that some can be done retrospectively. Sorry, Maddie.
Unexpected arrhythmia or unexpected.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
It can be planned ahead. So.
Yeah, like there's an EPA that looks at changes in vital signs interoperatively, for instance. Like when something happens in the OR, you're not going to take a moment and say, oh, let's do an EPA and then move forward. You're just going to act upon it and do it, right? So I think those are times when absolutely we can do EPAs after the fact. So I'd just like to again stress the feedback that we're giving residents, and it's coaching for improvement, and it's the learning, the assessment for learning as opposed to the assessment of their learning, which is a huge different mindset. So every EPA for every stage, it's on a file, electronic file that's 120 pages long. Instead of, I can send that to anyone who's interested in it, because it does go through every milestone of every EPA, and it gives you information about how many EPAs should be achieved prior to moving forward. I can send that to anyone who wants it. What I'm going to do, we're in the midst of having laminated sheets of all the EPAs that's going to be at every workstation. I know Karen did that 2 years ago with the introduction of CPD, but we're now on to version 3 of the EPAs, and they've all changed. We've tried to take down those old laminated cards at every workstation, but we're going to put up new ones, and they're going to be hopefully color-coded such that you'll see what is required in each stage of training. I just wanted to give a huge thank you to all the faculty as well, all the individuals who are academic advisors, who are on the competence committee, and every single faculty member that we have, because the assessment piece is significant. within the CPD. The other thing I want to say about the competency by design model is that the program director is no longer in charge of resident progression. So they've taken away that job of the program director and put it into the hands of a group of individuals who is the competence committee. And I think that's a good thing for a number of reasons. But it just goes to show you that there is now a committee that's involved in discussing resident promotion, and that information goes back to the program director and the residency training committee. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to open it up for questions, both for myself and Dr. Reddy. Any questions anyone has? Dylan.
I'm just curious, is the policy committee something, like when decisions are being made, whatever, it's like a resident director or discrepancies, is it just the majority of what people believe? As in, like, do you see that to reach a conclusion, do you see over half of them to decide, or is it a unanimous process?
We've never been in that position yet, because all of our residents have been performing well and progressing well. But it would be the majority vote if there were discrepancies. So when a resident file is presented to the competency committee, it's up to the primary reviewer to give a recommendation to the competence committee about what to do, and then the secondary reviewer gives further input if required, and then the competency committee basically decides. Yeah. Anne?
Thank you, Disney and Mike, for a fantastic work that you ran on your residence. I wanted to, this may be just a question of semantics, but is there a distinction between feedback and coaching, or is the two merged as coaching feedback? Because we both use, we sort of brought both concepts up.
Yeah.
How are they related? Are they synonymous? That's semantics.
Yeah.
It's important to clarify how is what we're doing now, coaching feedback, different from the feedback we used to do. Is there a difference? What's the distinction?
Do you want to tackle it or me?
So that's the challenge at the moment. The problem is the college talks about these low stakes assessment points. And when you're dealing with a high achieving cohort, there's no such thing as a low stakes assessment point. Everything that's evaluated is essentially high stakes because that's the nature of people being in this program or in medicine in general. Failure does not come easy. So separating the two and making it purely a coaching feedback session without any assessment component, I think is the secret behind it. Unfortunately, those two definitely do get merged. As soon as you put scores on things and as soon as it's evaluated for progression and competency, I think it changes the way it's looked at. I think I'm falling in the school where there are two schools in this whole thing that think that they should be separated, and there are lots of coaching points through the day, which we have done, as you say, in anesthesia forever, and add assessments for very specific things that should be decided a priori according to the EPA. But there are lots of other things that can be addressed in a day that do not fall in that domain.
It's a good question. Thank you, Anne. Anyone have any other questions? Bruno.
Mike, are we in the competency committee? I think we're in the initial stages of like really making it work and all that. Do you think today it would be possible to like find a resident really good for where he or she is and advance them 1 or 2 years?
Well, prior to CPD and the beginning of CPD, I think that's everyone's like that. Royal College took away that durational component of saying anesthesia residency is 5 years, and by the end of your 5 years, you should be competent. They took that away. However, there's still an underlying tone of a durational component to residency. You read the fine lines of the Royal College, they still have instilled that. Although there's definitely potential for individuals to progress quicker. You know, the other question is, so the Royal College Specialty Committees have put a benchmark on every EPA that, you know, the number of EPAs that are required to be achieved within each EPA. The question is that good enough? And should residents be acquiring more opportunities to receive coaching and feedback, even if they've achieved the minimal amount of EPAs that they're supposed to be achieving, right? So we're trying to promote one per day. We have yet come to a situation where residents are excelling quicker. I think there's one situation in one of the programs that was a transfer into anesthesia, and that's, you know, that has to come from the Royal College to progress them quicker.
Just to look at it another way, Bruno, is that the CBD model is based on minimal competence. So achieving the EPAs just gets you to minimal competence. I mean, in an anesthesia program, you're looking at mastery and excellence. So even though you might complete it in 4.5 years or whatever, it doesn't mean you're done with anesthesia, because you can obviously still improve. And that's how the Royal College is looking at it. So even though they've removed the time component to it, they do acknowledge that nobody is going to finish in a shorter period of time than the allocated 5 years.
And in fact, Ottawa, they introduced the CPD model different from the rest of the country several years ago, and they had a 4-year model. They're now going back to a 5-year model because they realize that I don't know the details, but I know that there are reasons why they're moving back to a 5-year model for their CPD.
We want to produce excellent anesthetists. That's the bottom line.
Any other questions? I want to thank you all for coming out this early morning. Thank you.